This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to this lovely sunny Wednesday night for a change with the Twilight Show tonight with me, Hannah Wilson. Tonight I'm going to be joined by Anthony Harwood, who's a science lead practitioner, and we're going to be discussing all things head of department, how to be a good head of department and how to manage a team and how they're the key to success in a school.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome. Tony, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can. Brilliant. Wonderful. Thank you for joining me on my show tonight. I feel like this is exactly what Teachers Talk Radio is about. You were, I think, listening to one of Tom's shows and you were like, oh, I wouldn't mind coming on one. And I went, oh, I spot that Norwich City logo. It's got to be my show.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I'm just hoping I can add a little bit of a value. Little bit of imposter syndrome at the moment, as it's the first time I've done this. But yeah, let's hope we can spark some debate anyway.
I just think it's one of those that teachers, those conversations where teachers are kind of engaging and having chats and stuff, and that's where kind of great things come from. So I'm sure there'll be lots of good things to talk about. Do you want to kind of introduce yourself and kind of your background in teaching?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Well, I've been in the job. It's easy to lose count, isn't it? I think it's 22 years now. Started in 2001, I think it was, and that's when I started my NQT year anyway. So, and I trained up in Yorkshire, in Hull, in some interesting schools up there. But I've spent most of my career split between Norfolk and Essex. I've more recently drifted down south to Essex and done a few jobs down there. But I've had a sort of variety of roles at sort of middle leader level. Did 2 years as a head of faculty at a Norfolk Academy as well. So and I've been second in department in quite a big department up until for the last 3 years through the lockdown, and a new job coming up in September. So quite excited for that as well. So a brand new role for September. So yeah, I've been around a little bit and seen some changes. So I mean, even in that, some may say relatively short time, or I'm not sure, depending on who's listening and so on. But yeah, I feel like I've seen a few changes in that time, a few interesting things. So yeah, I hope that's sort of enough background. Really, obviously, I'm a scientist. Biology is my specialism, but these days, as scientists will tell you, we're expected usually to teach across all three specialisms, and of course, depending very much on the school. It's 11 to 18 was the school that I was teaching at, so a little bit of A level. That means that obviously you'd stick a little bit more in your specialism. But actually, it's quite interesting as well to teach across all three subjects. So as I go into September in a smaller academy, it will be across all three specialisms, and I think only a small number of students actually study in triple science in September. So so quite a few experience of some quite varied schools as well. So I've taught at very small, leafy, suburban village sort of schools as well, and also some inner city areas too. So both within a Colchester school and a school in Norwich as well. So City Academy, that was when I was in Norwich. So I will, I'm not I'm not going to be controversial, but I probably will leave the names of some of the schools out.
Well, I think it's that, isn't it? Like the way departments are run vary depending on the type of school that it's kind of is. But I think it's that experience of kind of having been in different schools makes you a good head of department. And I think a lot of people, that's the controversial bit, isn't it? Already I'm going in. When like kind of NQTs and stuff are made head of departments and they haven't had that experience, they haven't been to different schools and they haven't necessarily kind of engross themselves in kind of different situations that can I'm going to throw it straight at you. Can somebody that hasn't got the experience of multiple kind of schools and multiple departments be a good head of department?
That's a really good question, actually. It's not a straightforward one. I'm glad you've said what you've said in terms of the variety. I mean, obviously they can, because obviously when you've got the skills to do a particular role, if you've got those skills, you're gonna be successful, depending on obviously your ability to learn on the job and to. If you're overconfident, you're then not in a position to learn, are you? But I think the issue is when you get what I would call, and again, maybe controversial, but what I would call career teachers. If you're prepared to sometimes, I'm sort of trying to think of the word. If you're given some feedback, take on board that feedback in the right sort of way. If you're that sort of person, well, you've got to be anyway. So I think even if you haven't experienced lots of schools, if you know a school really well, I do think you then become part of the furniture at that school, don't you? And I think that's also powerful because the students know you know the school inside out. You probably know many of the parents. So I think it's the swings and roundabout situation, isn't it? Yeah, and it's a balance between the two, but having that experience outside other schools, you've just seen a bit more of a range of different situations that might then help you if something comes up that you've not experienced before. So yeah,
and I guess it's that kind of thing, isn't it? If you've ended up in that situation and something arises that does make you feel out of depth, it's finding the right people in the school to talk to and where to kind of go for advice, as opposed to ploughing on and hoping that it'll all work out in the end.
Exactly, and I mean I'm back to square one, obviously in September. And like you say, if you are that teacher who's stuck to one school and worked their way up to SLT in that school, you know that school so well. So, but for me, I'm starting again. I'm going into a role where I will be expected eventually to manage other people, maybe to watch lessons, to sort of provide feedback to people who, and to them, I'm just the Johnny come lately, aren't I? So, yeah, it's one of those situations. I do think there's obviously pros and cons of both.
So how would you, going into a new role, approach kind of taking over a new team where you don't really know any of the teachers within your department?
I lost you a little bit there for the question, but I think I got the gist of it. So how, what would I do going into a new department and getting the
getting to know the team? What's kind of first on your agenda? I mean, if any of your new team are listening, I'm giving it away, but
yeah, I mean, I don't really know. The interesting thing is that the advantage I've got is that 4 of the team, including me, are brand new.
That's good.
So that gives me an advantage. But I think generally, you earn that respect, I think, by just show that you are passionate and that you are doing a good job yourself. I mean, I have been led by people before who felt the need to remind me all the time how hard they worked and how effective they were, and I'm thinking, well, you don't need to tell me because we'll know. I think it's really modeling, really, isn't it? What the sort of standards you expect, I suppose, and the sort of things that you expect. And I think if you try too hard, maybe people will call you out or notice that. I think it's just a case of showing that you are going to do the best that you can and that you are going to put the time and the effort in. And I think people will appreciate that then, and you will get that buy-in. And that's the thing that I sort of bore people with if they ask me about leading other people is my biggest thing, is buy-in. And I can't, again, I don't speak as an expert in any way, shape or form. But that's always been my way. If the team can see what you're trying to achieve, then even if they don't fully agree with it, I think they will try and come on board, because they realise that you've diagnosed something, you've identified something that you want to work on and promote, and that's what I've found, is that people will go with you if you get an element of buy-in from them.
Yeah, you've got to kind of show your purpose and show your worth, and also like there's that aspect, isn't it? If you've got the theory and the evidence to back it up as well, that always helps. Because when I went into my school, the results were quite poor for my department, and I came in and put in whole new schemes of work, and we went from kind of -1 to +1 in a year. But I was like, you've just got to go with me. Everything's done for you. That I'm not adding to your workload, and that's quite a key one. But like, it will make a difference. Like, the way I do, very knowledge based, it's very different to kind of how most people teach art. We start with the kind of the theory and then build it upon it, so they kind of understand the basis of it. I always argue with the science teachers about colour, but but it's kind of nice having those kind of that backing. If you can get that backing and they believe you, and you can be like, look, this is going to give good results, trust me. Kind of, look, here are the blocks that I've built, and this is why I'm doing it, this is how I'm doing it. And really kind of, rather than being kind of like, oh, well, this is what we're going to do, tough if you don't like it, kind of thing. It's that kind of getting that buy-in, isn't it?
Exactly that, yeah. And it's a balance, isn't it? Because obviously you are leading the department, so you do need to be leading them. But I think with most, I mean, I might have just been lucky in my career that the people who I've managed have generally been top notch. And anything sort of challenges I've had might be with teachers who just need a bit of extra support, who maybe just need a bit more confidence, have maybe sort of lost their way a little bit in certain aspects. But like you say, I've never, I mean, again, I might get controversial, you may well disagree with me, but there's certain phrases in education that really grate and grind on me. And one of the ones that I still hear now is hold to account. People will say to me, you've got to hold this member of staff to account. And I think I understand what they're trying to say to me, but I think that can be interpreted as, for example, I'm going to give you a task, I'm going to set you a deadline, and if you don't meet that deadline, I'm going to come down on you like a ton of bricks, sort of thing. Whereas my personal feeling is that in the role that we do, the stress really, and the thing that gives us a sense of excitement, because it is a challenge, is when we're in the classroom. And when we're in the classroom, there's going to be challenge. I mean, let's make no bones about it, especially post-COVID. It's going to be challenging in that classroom, isn't it? In probably in most schools across the country. So for me, there's already enough challenge and in the job without me adding to it as a leader. And that's what I always do.
I think that's really interesting, because I've talked about it on my other shows, that like there's always like that human aspect can get lost quite a lot, and the fact that you don't know what's going on with that person. The day that you've gone in to look at them, it could be that something's happened at home and everything's fallen apart, but they're keeping it together and got to work and are trying to get through the day, but they've not told anybody. And it's that kind of, everyone's allowed an off day. Nobody's going to have Ofsted amazing lessons every day, 5 lessons a day. And things like that. And the same as on the flip side, in terms of what you talked about, kind of workload, like I try and make sure anything that I introduce is to reduce workload. Like, there should be a work-life balance. And things like, if I'm doing it and I'm finding it hard to fit in that time, then gosh, an NQT or an early careers teacher is going to really struggle kind of with that if I'm struggling. So it's kind of, you've got to gauge, just because you find it easy doesn't mean other people will.
Exactly it. And then that's the thing. I mean, I'm sure you're aware, Mr. Strickland, who regularly posts, and pretty much everything he says, I just so wholly agree with. So the Strickermeister, he said just that recently. It needs to be a situation where an ECT could walk into a classroom and teach that lesson with some degree of success. kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's all about putting staff in that position where you can. There's only so much you can do as a middle leader, obviously. And
I think the bonus extra person, or should I say, I'll do my football wrestling bonus player. It's like the crowd, but the bonus player in your department is actually the cover supervisors. If you can get them on your side and get them to be able to understand your lessons, it will make life way easier. I had, unfortunately, when I first started my department, I had a couple of staff leave at Christmas. I think it was kind of, they'd already decided they were leaving, and I arrived, and then and we couldn't hire anybody, so we ended up having cover for 2 terms, and I wrote all the lessons so all the cover teachers could teach it, and they were like, oh my gosh, this is so easy to follow, this is great. And it didn't disadvantage the students. So I think it also, don't forget your department extends past your initial people. I mean, you've got your science technician, I've got my art technician, but it's the people outside of it as well. It's not just your kind of inner little people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And again, I think a lot of schools are in that position, aren't they, where there is some element of temporary or cover staff around. But we tend to be quite lucky. The people who come in to do that are absolute diamonds. I mean, I know a particular guy, I won't mention him by name, but he's come in to sort of help us recently as an ex-head teacher himself. And it's just a case of, we can give him the resources, we can show him where our resources are, and he can run with it. So he very much became part of the team. So yeah, it does make a lot of sense.
And I think it's that, isn't it? It's if you're to be a good head department, is to have things up your sleeve and have things planned. Like, I always have at least 1 or 2 lessons booked into my kind of termly curriculum, because I know that the odds are that somebody's going to be off sick, and I need something that isn't going to take me as head of department loads of time to sort out and print out and sort. But it's there and easy to find, easy to cover, already written out. You don't want to be doing it as like kind of 10 o'clock at night when someone's texted you saying their kid's vomiting or they've ended up in hospital or what have you. You want something at your fingertips. Like, having that preparation is going to make your life as a head of department much easier long term, especially with the kind of the way cover and things are going these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've tried some different things. Something that we tried last year with a little bit of success was we wrote a series of skills lessons that would fit in anywhere within our scheme, and we fully resourced those with all of the answers and everything else. Because that's the other thing. Quite often, if covers set, it will be questions in a book, but quite a lot of our cover staff want to go through the answers with the students during the lesson. So we do try to provide that as well. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Planning is such a big aspect of it. Having that up your sleeve, it does make a huge difference, definitely.
And in terms of, how do you get your kind of team to like help with planning? Because that can be something quite difficult or daunting if you're a new head of department, how to get perhaps people in your team that might be more experienced than you to kind of like join in and collaborate and make them, because if they have like a slight ownership with it, they can kind of help and build it, then they're more likely to kind of help, and it's going to work better as a team.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's, again, depending on who they are. For the younger teachers and the ECTs, it's very much, if you can give them, obviously they've got a lot on anyway, so the first job is to make sure that they can cope with any extra thing. But for them, it might just be something useful that they can say that they've been involved with, something that they can take a little bit of ownership of as they make that step up to a possible TLR in the future. Just having something that they can sort of make theirs. And certainly with the teachers who are on UPS, that's another little trick that my ex-head of department would say, that the people on the UPS scale should really have a little bit more sort of ownership of what's going on in the department. And again, maybe I've been very lucky, because I don't think I've really been in many situations. I have had people in the past who have said, "Oh, do I have to do that? Do I really have to do that?" But again, once you've got that buy-in, once, like you alluded to earlier on, once teachers buy into what you're trying to do, they see that down the line it's going to help them. And once they realise that that's the case, they will pull together, in my experience. Once they realise what your end game is, I think they will.
And I guess as well, it goes on to what you were saying earlier about kind of feedback. We haven't talk quite about that yet, but also in terms of them being able to feed back to you in terms of how they think what worked and what didn't, especially if you're trying new things. Like if they feel open enough to be able to talk to you about things, then it then becomes this two-way conversation. Like we're all learning, we're all developing, and it becomes this slightly safer conversation to have.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and I do think that's really important as well, because the people who know best what's going on is the people at the chalk face, isn't it? And I think again, it's that balance of listening to that feedback, isn't it? You can't just be, here's how we doing it. I'm the line manager, so here's what you need to do, and that's the end of it. I think, like you say, you've got to have those two-way conversations, and a team of people will have such a myriad of skills across that team, at different levels of experience, and you've really got to sort of harness that, I think, haven't you? Everyone's got something to bring to the table. So I think it's obviously important to know your department really well, who's got those strengths, in what areas are those strengths going to be. I mean, when I was head of department, I did just focus on the boring stuff, and I had an excellent second in science who did everything, all of the extra things, let's say. So, for example, open evening. She was all over open evening. We had, I've never seen anything like it. We had a Harry Potter themed open evening. We had smoke machines. We had coloured lights. We had all these different experiments that were linked to different sort of aspects and characters within Harry Potter. And then the following year, she did superheroes. So I think once you know that somebody has got a skill set, again, they're likely to want to take ownership of where their strengths are, really. And then it just that's what's worked for me in the past, knowing people's strengths.
But I like that bit. I like the bit where your department shows off to outside of your department, if that makes sense. That the kind of I pride myself on the fact that for open evening, I came up with the genius idea of laser cutting our own rulers, and kind of having them all branded for our department, and had that going, and the kids could come in and pick the rulers that they wanted. And then all of a sudden, maths were over going, "Can you laser cut us some rulers? We'd quite like some of those." And it's that kind of that, and I used to have a bit of a Twitter off with the drama department. So our school's website used to have whichever tweet mentioned the school would be top and would be the first thing you see when you join the school website at the bottom. And so we would have a bit of a competition as to who would be on top of the Twitter feed. And it's like we'd have to knock each other off and things. But it's nice to kind of promote your department, and it makes, I guess, absolutely, that's the thing as well. Sometimes we can get a little bit bogged down in the negatives, but actually seeing the positive of your team and kind of the impact that you can have on a school and kind of those different things. I had a kid just before the summer holidays, which was the best way to end it, won a drawing competition, and we had Preet Chandy in and talk about her Guinness World Record for the furthest solo trek across Antarctic. And it was just like for that tiny little competition to spread into this, and I had all the geography teachers wanting to come in and listen to it, and it's that thing, isn't it, that actually you are, although you are a department, you are a school ultimately, and it's nice when it kind of feeds beyond that, and you kind of have this team that really kind of engage the students, but also you can show off how well you're doing as a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And because we are quite insular as our faculties and our departments, aren't we, as well, at times? And that's sort of day to day, that's really how it has to be, isn't it? But it's just nice to know a little bit about what goes on in other departments, isn't it? And it always surprises me how much overlap there is between curriculum. We've got overlap, for example, with history. History they do the history of medicine, which overlaps quite a lot with what we do. PE obviously is a massive amount of overlap with biology, maths, geography. Do quite a bit of geology. In fact, I would accuse geography of nicking some of our geology, but let's not go there from our curriculum. I don't want to upset. Yeah, I don't want to upset anyone there. But yeah, when you actually, if there is any way that you sort of can come together, or like you say, promote your department outside the department, yeah, it's something really interesting. And I always really used to look forward to when you get to wander around the school at open evening, because we had a head teacher previously. I can't remember which one it was now, but they'd always say to us, make sure you wander around at open evening, go and have a look at what other departments are doing. And it's a real eye opener, because obviously usually we don't know, do we, unless we've been to cover a lesson, which again is one, let's not say that too loud, but that's one sometimes an advantage of doing a cover lessons. You get to see some quite interesting things that goes on around the school. But yeah, we are very insular, aren't we? And I don't know whether that's, again, as I've been teaching longer, when I started my career, the staff room was the place where everybody would be, pretty much. And I don't know if it's just how things have gone or the design of school buildings, but it seems to have become a little bit more insular in terms of, or maybe it's a science thing, maybe it's just
that was going to be my question. I was going to ask you, do you eat with your department and no one else? Because my science department there's a couple that have deviated out and now eat with us, but majority of the time they all eat together and I never see them.
I've got to be honest, we aren't good for that, are we, in science? And it's it's probably a bit of it's probably me pigeonholing a bit here, isn't it? But we do tend to sort of stick together and stick with the people that we know. So
I think that's an everybody thing. Like I stick with art and DT, but since they changed one of the DT rooms to a science lab, now the science have started coming over to us, and it's really interesting talking to different people. And prior to that, when I was new at the school, I made friends with the drama teacher, and she was in we had different staff rooms, so I would make sure once a week I went and ate in that staff room, and that was kind of maths and languages and drama. So it was, and then once a week I ate in a different block, which was all the cover teachers and English teachers and geography and history teachers, and then the rest of the week I kind of eat with my department. But it was, I find, especially as a head of department or even a new teacher, that would be one of my tips, to go and try and at least once a week go and eat somewhere else. So either you're bumping into other head of departments and you're kind of keeping on track of the things that you should be doing that you've maybe forgot because you only had those meetings like once a term and you forget what it was that you should be doing. But also you kind of see if other departments or other areas of the school are having the same feeling about the school, the same feeling towards the children. Like if your department's just having a bit of a tough time in terms of a certain class, is everyone else having the same kind of issue with that class? Because that always feels a little bit more reassuring when you're like, oh, it's not just me. It's like everyone else absolutely.
As well. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right. And I don't know, again, whether, it's a sort of a time constraint for some people, but I do think it's worth the time to do it. I don't think I've ever been off and spoken to people I don't normally speak to and sort of regretted it. It's always completely the opposite to that. I mean, for the school I've just finished working at is huge. It's 1,800 in total students, if you include the sixth form. So it's massive, and it's a split site school as well. So actually, there'd be people who I don't know who they are, and I've never seen them before, or I might have seen just sort of them in passing, and just sort of said hello, but that's about it. And actually, I think if you do know a few more people, I don't know, it does help. It definitely does help if you can. Obviously, some when you do your training and your whole staff PD, I know that some people have cottoned on to this and they actually force teachers to mix. and I do think that can be quite useful. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
In terms of kind of like CPD then, in terms of it varies from school to school as to what they do, but I think like in terms of, I think basically the middle leaders are the cogs of the school. They're the ones that really have the most influence because they're feeding everything back to SLT, who aren't really on the in lessons that regularly still teaching, and they're the ones that are feeding everything back. If you have a bad head department that's not feeding that back both ways appropriately, then that can really affect kind of results in a school and things. So I think having middle leaders are that cog that have to keep going and that have to work really well. And I think, how do you think the best kind of ways that kind of things are relayed to middle leaders, if that makes sense, and then how do you kind of feed the information down, if that makes sense, that way?
Yeah, and that's an interesting question, because just sort of a general point sort of on how schools run. I mean, schools used to be, we went through a period, it felt to me, where schools were very top down in terms of teaching and learning, and it's very much driven by that one person on SLT who was teaching and learning. And obviously that's still a very important role, but it seems to me now that it is coming more from the middle than it ever has been. And obviously with the introduction of the deep dives and the way that Ofsted are looking at the school, and I do feel that SLT in recent years have given a lot more leeway, and I think there's research that backs this up. I'm not a big one for looking into research, but I remember being told by a previous head teacher that they tend to allow the middle leaders to take ownership a lot more of the teaching and learning. So the policies, for example. I'm probably not answering your question yet.
I'm with you.
I will circle back around, but it's just because you touched on something that I did think of, earlier this afternoon that I did want to sort of bring up, which is this idea that middle leaders now have that ownership, and I think that really does empower those middle leaders, because they, we're not trying to fit what we want to do into the confines of the whole school. Very strict whole school policy, if that makes sense. So in terms of that, in terms of feeding down, getting back to your question, I think it's a lot more effective now, because that feeding down is more of a general theme. So we want you to try this, and that's what's fed down. But what they will say to us then is, right, here is what we want to promote in the school. And it's a Rosenshine is something that's been mentioned quite a lot by our SLT generally, the principles of instruction, which I think people are really starting to buy into now, because we've actually done some really good CPD on it. But anyway, we then have the opportunity to actually sit as a faculty and think, right, how can we take this forward? What are we going to do? And that's what I think the change has been since, because again, I'm going to say something potentially controversial, but I do think education lost its way a little bit in the late 2000s and the early 2010s, that sort of time when we went very academized. And I think we became very top down, because people were saying, right, here's what we've got to do. You've got to do this. And schools had very sort of, I don't want to say regimented, but they had very specific ways that they wanted things done. And what was happening was SLT were top down, saying, right, here's what I want you to do. Here's what your lesson's going to look like. You need to do 5 minutes on this. You need to do mini plenaries. You need to do A, B, C, and D. And that, I think, was the problem. It wasn't necessarily that it was lost in translation. I think it was that middle leaders were coming back and saying, you know what, I don't think that's going to work for us, because how we teach in science is very different to, I don't know, how you teach in drama or art or whatever, if that makes sense. I mean, there's obviously fundamentals that are similar, but I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah, so, no, you completely are, because when, like, it's that difference of I was at a very, very big, very kind of well-known trust, and it was that whole thing of, right, everyone needs to all do the exact same kind of way of marking. We all need to mark kind of our books once a fortnight, and it's like, well, English are teaching like what 3-4 lessons for the same group. I've got six. That's six. If they do kind of 2 classes of with 3 lessons over the 2 weeks and what have you, I'm teaching 6 classes into their 2 lots of marking. I've got 6 lots to do, and it just and we were just constantly trying to hammer it out, trying to keep up, and it just didn't work. And it seems like same as the way people assess, like even further into it, it's like, oh well, everyone's going to do this color pen and everyone's got to mark it like this, and it's like, well, that doesn't work for art. Like I remember I had one HDMI ex-inspector come in, and he was trying to teach us how to document our marking, and they wanted us to take a picture of the kids drawing, then feed back to the kids, then the kids improved the drawing, and then we had to take a picture of it afterwards, and then get them to explain how they'd done it, and then photograph it. And I was like, I don't have the time to photograph every child's picture before and after they've improved it. It's just not physically possible within my day.
Wow,
but
that's
I know exactly the period of time you're talking about in teaching, and it was just that kind of that constant like need to show evidence, wasn't it? And I think has
yes.
relaxed. And that when I moved to my current school and they went, yeah, here's the old assessment policy, but like these bits have to stay in. This is what everyone's got, but the rest of it you can make up your own, and it has to fit with the department. And there was that comments and conversations, and it wasn't just like, well, I'm going to do this. There was like, well, why? And that I think that's quite nice. That kind of conversation as to, well, why are you going to do that? How does that work? And it's getting that thing of, like you said, with the deep dive. So anybody that's listening that's a new middle leader and kind of going, what do I need to do? It's that kind of thing with the deep dives of making sure your senior leadership know exactly what you're teaching and why you're teaching and why you've constructed your curriculum like that. And the other end is that your team are going to say the same thing, and your students are going to say the same thing, from somebody that's been deep dive recently. So it was for me, it was really great that they went and asked senior leadership. They came and spoke to me. I told them. They went and asked my team. They said the same thing, and then they interviewed the students. And I was very lucky enough that I was able to sit in and listen to the students, and they reeled off the same thing. So it's everyone's on the same page, and it's that flow. But you've got the autonomy within your department, but you need to make sure you're able to explain it to everybody in the chain. If you've got one loose link, then it's kind of all resting on that person.
Yes, absolutely. But I mean, that is, I don't think I've worked in a department since the deep dives come in. It sounds like what you've done there is a little bit ahead of sort of where we've got to, but that is the ideal, isn't it? Like you say, where everyone's buying into that curriculum intent, and people can talk about sort of the thinking and the methodology behind how you do things. That's the ideal. But like you say, it's not top down. I don't think the top down thing really worked, and I'm really glad that we seem to have moved beyond that now in education, whereby we are, as middle leaders, we are empowered, and we are in a position where we can tailor it. Because at the end of the day, when you appoint a middle leader, they are the expert. That's why you've appointed that person. And if you're then going to micromanage what they do, that's obviously, it's counterintuitive to why you've appointed that individual in the first place, isn't it? It does make a lot of sense. So in terms of passing down that information, I think it works a lot better now because we're empowering middle leaders rather than micromanaging them.
And in terms of kind of thinking in terms of that kind of feedback and kind of how you keep track of your team, what do you think has been the best kind of ways? Because I know there's that, like, obviously kind of massive like observation with grades, like that's all gone, but which have you felt is the most effective, or do you think we've kind of I'm not sure whether we quite nailed that yet in education, but
no, we
kind
haven't.
Of how we kind of look at it?
We haven't. And again, it's funny you should mention that. I was thinking about it today because, again, we went through a phase, and I don't want to, I don't want to be sort of controversial about this, but I do think teaching has learned some lessons. We went through a phase where people were scared of observations because of what they knew the result of that observation will be. Grading a lesson was an absolutely crazy way to do it, and I think we all agree now that was such a big mistake. But unfortunately, you do still have some staff who fear that process, whereas I think we need to take that fear away and maybe try to normalise people being in lessons, because actually I feel it's a real benefit for anyone else to be in a lesson, whether it's a member of SLT, whether it's a head of faculty, whether it's an ECT, just popping in, saying hello. I'm not saying we should be wandering in and out of lessons and disturbing the learning, but what I'm saying is we need to try and promote that feeling that someone coming into the room is a normal thing. It's not a negative, and I think that's where it comes in. So the learning walk can work really well if it's done in a constructive way. I mean, how our school works at the moment is we still do a formal observation once a year for performance management. But other than that, it is learning walks, it is popping in, it's sharing practice. So I think turning it into a positive, we've got to, because it is a positive when it's done properly, isn't it? And the other thing is, if someone's coming into my lesson, the students know people are going to pop in. That can be quite powerful as well.
Yeah.
If the assistant head teacher pops in and says, "Yeah, everything okay, sir?" And I say, "Oh, yeah, I'm okay, but could you just have a word with, could you just have a little word here quickly?" And if the students see that, I can't see anything but a positive coming from it. So I think we need, and I agree with you, we haven't quite got it right yet, have we? And it's not an easy one to solve, because obviously we've got to work within the agreements from the unions in terms of observations. But I think it needs to be seen as a positive thing and sharing, because we get into a bit of and I speak for myself here, we get into a bit of a groove, into a bit of a rut with our teaching, where we're maybe not stepping outside what we do on a day to day, and actually seeing other practice. We can learn so much from other practice, whether it's a more experienced teacher than us or whether it's an ECT. There's always something that we can learn. We're always learning. I think we need to remember that we're always learning.
I completely agree. I really like the idea. I'm very much a similar, like a flip kind of thing with observations. Like at a previous school that I worked at, I happened to have the classroom next to the deputy head, and he would just wander around. And be like, oh my God, what did you see? What did you think? And like for ages, and then I think after like the fifth time, I was like, right, are you going to give me any feedback? And he's like, no, I just wander in and out. If I had anything I was worried about, I'll come and chat to you, but I just wander in and out. And it was just a change in my mentality. I'm like, oh, okay, this is normal. And it was very much promoted to go in and go wander around each other's lessons and kind of have that kind of shared ownership. And I think, like you said, especially with kind of early careers teachers and things like that, to take that pressure away and it be this positive experience. Like, I'm just going to wander in. It's not formal. You're more than welcome to come and wander in my lesson. I don't mind. But also that kind of supportive conversation of explaining it to SLT, that person is struggling with that class. If you happen to be walking past, can you stick your head in? And sometimes having that little just oomph. And I've had that literally at the end of the term with a teacher that's far more experienced than me in my department, but she had one class and she just couldn't hack them and was really struggling with them. And I just mentioned to SLT, and she was happy for me to mention it. And they kind of like, if any of us were free when we were teaching, because I wasn't, so people were able to kind of just stick their head in, and it's just that support, so you feel like you're not alone.
Exactly. And it doesn't take much, does it? That's the other thing. It only takes a little thing, popping in. And I think it's the idea that when someone comes in, again, tell me if I'm just speaking for myself here, but there was a time in my career where someone come in and my immediate thought was scrutiny. I'm being scrutinized. From the moment they come in to the moment they leave, I've got to be on my game. I've got to be at my best. Whereas we need to change that. We need to shift that focus to actually, I'm coming in to see if you're okay. I'm coming in to support you. And if we can do that, and then I think it will make a difference. We're not going in to scrutinise every time. And just to sort of pick you up on something you said earlier, the taking the pictures of work is just mad. I'm speechless. I was going to sort of mention a story where we had someone from the DFE come into one school, and I won't mention which one, and they found a set of books that hadn't been marked for a whole term or something like that. And that sparked a complete knee-jerk reaction. We had 3 different coloured stickers in the book. And what I found was that SLT would come in and they would look down and they'd be looking at the books and they wouldn't look up at what I was doing. And this happened again and again, because there was a 3-week cycle. It was class teacher feedback, and then it was peer assessment, and then it was self-assessment. And you had to follow this 3-week rota. But when they come in, they weren't even looking at what was happening in the class. And that was a real low point for me. I thought, what are we doing? They come in and just looking at the books. They're not even interested in what's happening in the classroom. So this idea of scrutiny was always, for me, again, in that period of time that I think we've both pointed out, where teaching lost its way a little, scrutiny was the problem, wasn't it? People associated someone being in the classroom with scrutiny, and even the students did too. And we've got to shift that mindset. away from the fact that someone coming in is scrutinising and over to the fact that that person is supporting.
Well, that's made me think. So my very, very first Teachers Talk radio show back in December was I did the CPD bug, and I talked about whether you had it or not, and whether that was the key to kind of engaging teachers and having longevity in teaching was to actually get people really engaged in it. And one of my friends came on at the end, and they were had started this new concept. It's a company, I won't mention it, but they basically you pair people up with other people, and they have a school concept. So theirs was like cold calling, and everybody does it, but they would go and monitor each other. So they would go pop in and watch somebody's lesson for 10 minutes and then feedback, and it was all done on this system. And if heads of department or senior leadership wandered around and happened to see somebody doing it, they can kind of make a little comment, and it will ping up to their head that somebody had seen somebody in their department doing it. And it created this real kind of positive culture of going into each other's lessons and kind of sharing this good practice, as opposed to it being somebody's going in and looking and then you're going to get punished if you're not doing it. And I think they've been doing it 4 or 5 years now, that school. They're one of the pilot schools for this thing, and my school's going to start it in September, so I put my hand up to do it. But I think my school only want to do it with trainee students and early careers students, and I'm just like, no, I feel it needs to be everyone piles in. But I do think that's quite an interesting concept. And I think it'll be interesting to see whether it actually has an effect and changes the way we look at it. But I think it is that it needs to be a positive sharing experience, but also it's that difficult thing of as a head of department as well. It's like, oh, SLT have said that our focus is cold calling this year. We've all got to do it. And then you get the groan, oh, here's another fad that's coming in, and people that don't want to do it. You need to have that thing that's if you're going to deliver it to your department, you need to be positive about it. Because if you go in going, oh, we're at it again, you're going to engage the department, but also you've got to kind of lead by example, but also try and find a positive way of doing it. And like you said earlier, try and find a way that it will adapt to your subject and work for your subject, so they can see how to implement it properly, I guess.
I think that is a key, because I think there was a lot of, and maybe I should sort of admit a little bit to this as well at times. I think there has been an element of SLT have said, here's what we've got to do, and there's an element of eye rolling when you're in that faculty meeting.
It didn't come from me. I've said that one before.
Yeah, so now, I'm glad we've moved away from that now, because again, I think we've got that buy-in. But I do agree, having that, and most teachers I find do want to show off their practice. I mean, if I have a member of staff who wants to go for any reason and look at some other teaching around the school, different faculties, people are happy to say, yeah, come into my lesson, come and watch the lesson. I mean, I don't know if I'd be one of those people. Maybe I need to be better, but I do. People are quite happy for others to come in and have a look at what they're doing. So I don't think it would create a huge shift. Certainly to see, it's very interesting to see what other faculties do, because it's very different. That a PE lesson is very different from a music lesson or an art lesson. It's you can take aspects of how they do that and use it in your own practice. But like you said, we definitely need to get out and around the school. It's easier said than done, of course, but yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me to do that.
Right, we've been nattering on for 50 minutes already. I'm gonna just play our news, and then we're gonna come back on to our second half.
Oh, lovely. Okie dokie.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Evening Standard reports that the education expert who oversaw a 90% fall in school exclusions in Glasgow has been tasked with driving down exclusions in London. Maureen McKenna is a former Director of Education at Glasgow City Council and has been hired as a consultant by the VRU, with the goal of boosting inclusive education. According to the paper, McKenna's work saw fixed-term exclusions drop by 90% over 14 years, which also coincided with a 50% reduction in violence. Driving down exclusions is seen as important by many, and whilst less than 1 in 200 children in the UK are permanently excluded, the VRU says that almost 1 in 2 of the country's prison population were excluded as children. Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, said he welcomed Ms McKenna's appointment, and McKenna herself said she was delighted to be part of the project. However, critics of the zero exclusion philosophy pointed out that schools only use suspension and exclusions in response to serious breaches of behaviour and discipline, and that this new approach could make schools less safe for all. Schools Week reported on a new study which asked parents about the impact the pandemic had on children's social and emotional skills. The study by IFS and UCL's Institute of Education also noted that reception-age pupils were amongst the worst affected. The experts concluded that there was no evidence that youngsters from disadvantaged families fared worse than their non-disadvantaged peers. However, they did stress that economic instability did have an impact on well-being. Children whose families' pre-COVID employment situation changed during or shortly after the pandemic were far more likely to be negatively impacted, even if parents didn't suffer any significant loss of earnings. Jeff Barton, General Secretary of School Leaders Union ASCO, said the research underlined the need for extra funding for children's services. He went on to say that, combined with factors such as the cost of living crisis, COVID has taken a real toll on pupils' health and well-being. Barton made it clear that schools are doing everything they can to support pupils with both academic and emotional development, but are doing so in the face of budget challenges and lack of investment from the government in both education and children's services. The Guardian features comments from Russell Group that elite universities will turn away increasing numbers of UK students over the next few years in favour of more lucrative international applicants. Tuition fees for home students have been frozen at £9,250 a year since 2017. But experts calculate that as a result of rising inflation, the real value has dropped to £6,000. This is significantly less than it costs to teach the average student. With the number of 18-year-olds in the UK continuing to rise, leading universities say they won't be able to meet demands for British sixth formers without government support, or they will have to raise tuition fees. The Russell Group has estimated that universities will be losing an average £4,000 per year for every UK undergraduate they teach by next September. Universities have said the decline in the value of fees means they cannot meet staff demands on pay, despite facing 5 years of industrial action, including marking boycotts, which means some students will graduate without a grade this summer. Finally, a study by Myriad suggests that mindfulness in schools doesn't improve young people's mental health. The My Resilience in Adolescence, or Myriad project, investigated the effectiveness of a brief school-based mindfulness intervention in supporting the mental health of young people in secondary school pupils aged 11 to 16. The project spanned over 8 years and involved more than 28,000 students, 650 teachers, and 100 schools. Mindfulness in Schools project was taught by teachers to their students after completing the programme themselves. Although inconsistent practice was one reason mindfulness didn't work, there were other factors to consider, particularly looking at factors which contribute to poor mental health, such as inequality and deprivation. The research also suggests that the treatment of mental health problems is best left to experienced and qualified mental health professionals, not teachers and schools. Full details of the study and its findings can be found by visiting the welcome.org website. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
Thank you for that lovely news. So on that one, they're obviously talking about well-being, and I know that's an area of kind of as a head of department that you're quite interested in?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
What do you think is our responsibility as a head of department in terms of your staff's well-being?
I think just having an understanding of where the situation that member of staff is in, really, and like you said, you mentioned earlier workload, and obviously that the work-life balance. So I think it is something that we need to take seriously and not just pay lip service to, I think, with well-being, because it is something that's so central to what we do, and I think, as you've alluded to before, it's something that staff are quite good at covering if things aren't going quite so well. I think it's something that we've developed as a survival strategy, perhaps, for the job that we do, and to try and cover up those issues, and the fact that there's this fear that if we're seen to not have the best mental health, that sort of goes hand in hand with how well we do our job, if that makes sense. So I think in the past, sometimes poor mental health has led to staff being on various support programs when actually that potentially wasn't what was needed at that moment in time. So I think it's just having that understanding of where that member of staff is coming from, having that sort of relationship with them where you do have that sort of personal side to it. And I think you alluded to that earlier as well, didn't you? Just that the fact that we are human beings, and that is very central to what we do. And I do think workload is a big part of that, and I think confidence is a big part of that as well.
I think it took me a really long time to realise that the world doesn't end if I stop working.
Well, exactly.
If I decide one day a week I'm going to finish at 3:00, like it's perfectly fine, and the kids will still pass, and it's not going to have a massive impact. I think I was a good very, very heavily pregnant because I worked right up to my due date, and
Wow.
I remember my deputy kicking me out of the school at 7 p.m. going,
Wow.
"Stop making resources for whilst you're away. Like, it will happen. Like, that's the point of the maternity cover. They will pick up the pieces. You don't have to." Because I was head of curriculum enrichment and outreach, so I was trying to write, although I was an art teacher, I was trying to write the PSHE curriculum because we had 3 days off timetable where they did all the sex ed and politics and all that stuff. So I was trying to write every single lesson for all the teachers across the whole entire school for every kid whilst I was away. And he was just like, you need to stop and go home. You need to stop this. Like, it's not right that you're here so late. So I think you have a responsibility as a head department to kind of find the early careers teachers that are like busily beavering away till silly o'clock and be like, no, you need to go home, and make sure your team are stopping. And if they're not stopping, kind of work out why. Like, what are they not doing efficiently that means that they're still there at kind of 5-6 o'clock at night, like 5 days a week? Because something's going wrong.
Yeah, and I think you're right there. Over planning. I think about my sort of lowest point when I did have some time, when I was finding everything very difficult. And I think what I ended up doing was staying much later and just over planning and taking twice as long to plan a lesson than I really needed to. And I think there's a sweet spot there where you can only sort of plan. Planning's important, and that's drummed into us quite rightly from when we start our training. But yeah, like you say, there has to be that balance, doesn't there? And sometimes you need somebody to get in your ear and just say, yeah, that you need to think about what you're doing. You're doing a little bit too much. And I think we do become workaholics, don't we? And I think it is knowing when to stop and when to switch off, isn't it?
I suppose, especially like at this time of year, it's that balance of how much work do you do in the holidays so you're prepared and ahead of the game versus how much is that going to take away from your holidays and you're going to get anxiety and not sleep before going back into school. It's that balance, isn't it? Which one's going to be the best for your mental health? And I guess everyone's slightly different. And the same as, like, if someone's struggling in your department to get all their marking done, then by all means, as head of department, offer to help and sit and do it with them, or then maybe you might find where they're going wrong or give them a better idea or help them. But at the same time, I've made the mistake where, especially when I've had shared groups with other teachers, that I've gone, oh, they're really struggling, I'll mark it for them. And then suddenly I've marked all the shared groups for the whole entire year. And I've done that for SLT as well. I've had SLT that I've shared because they only don't do like 5 hours a week. And then I've ended up doing all their marking and all the reports for the shared group for the whole year. So it's that balance, isn't it, as a head of department? By all means help, but don't hinder yourself either. Like, it's not your responsibility to do everybody else's work. So if somebody doesn't do something, I guess it's like that kind of, we said, like, it's interesting, you've got to hold people accountable, but you've got to think nicely about the way you do it, but also don't fill the gaps where everyone else, if people aren't kind of doing what they don't do, overdo your share, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think you can do. Yeah, you can end up doing a bit too much. I mean, what we've done before with members of staff is we've covered one of their lessons so that they can go and do some marking. So I think there's different ways of doing it. And obviously, fundamentally looking at the policy, whether it's a workable policy as well. Yeah, I mean, for some people, the working is sort of a coping mechanism, isn't it? I do think you have some teachers who you need to let them feel like they're fully planned. So it's a real balance, and everyone does things a little bit differently, don't they, as well? And you've got to sort of allow for the fact that some people will plan to the nth degree, and some people maybe will be a little bit more flexible, let's say, once and there's no right or wrong way to do that, really. So you've just got to let people be themselves, but also obviously you've got to make sure that they're being sensible about it, that they're meeting obviously those basic expectations. But it's just knowing the team really well, isn't it? The better you know them, the easier that is to do.
And I guess also it's like that kind of get to know them as people as well, find out a little bit about them, like kind of like it goes a mile if I remember I had a free period and somebody wanted to go watch their kids' school play, but they didn't want to because it was year 11. I'm like, well, I'm free, I'll come teach them, and they're not going to miss out. And it's kind of that well-being thing of kind of boosting your team and making them see that they're human as well. I think you talked about earlier in terms of how to kind of manage that and how to give feedback as opposed to it being regimented, but we never quite got into it. What's the best way of kind of feeding back to your team?
Are feeding back in terms of individual feedback or feeding back?
Yeah, should we go individual first? Let's go individual.
I'm not really sure. It's just a case of, I think, how can you strike that balance between meeting, giving them a target that's going to help them, but not something that's going to then impact too much on their confidence. And I found that people who needed support, confidence is a sort of quite a big aspect of it, really. It's not sort of lack of wanting to work hard that's the problem or anything like that. So I think it's just doing it in a way where you are giving them something that's sort of a smart target, if you like, something that's going to be achievable to them within a sort of a suitable period of time, kind of thing, and to give them actual real life ideas about what they can change. So not just, don't just say something like you need more questioning in your lesson, but how can they do that? Something that's not a very general comment, but something that they can actually try, that's actually going to make a difference for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I know. I think it's you, Tom, that's listening, and Nathan. They do a end of year room 101 of teaching things, and I think that's one of the things that should go into the NOS is like targets that are based on grades, especially with results coming out tomorrow, because you're not responsible for how that child is going to be in that moment of that exam, how they're sitting. You don't know, like, if something happened the day before, and to be held responsible is really difficult because it is down to the student. So I always think targets shouldn't be kind of based on kids' results. But like you said, they should be smart, so they should be measurable. You should be able for them to show you evidence that they are able to do what you set them. So I think it's that balance, isn't it, of getting the right target and it being personal for them but achievable and something that they're kind of motivated to do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, them seeing that it's achievable is a really big part of that as well, isn't it? But yeah, I agree with you in terms of the data-driven target. And obviously schools do things differently. We do have, as part of our policy at our school, that there has to be we did actually drop completely the performance related target in the end. I know that some schools they always use the word to work towards, or develop towards, so it's not a hard target, if you like. Obviously we need to take results into account, but it seems again that there's been a little bit of a shift, and I don't know whether this is my imagination, but the shift seems to be back towards teaching and learning again, that they've moved the focus very slightly away. I mean, Ofsted, if I dare mention them, seem to have moved their focus away from outcomes as well. So I think it's another thing that says to me that a little bit of common sense is coming back into the profession in terms of that. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, I do. And I was going to say, I don't know whether you have this in science, but because obviously your targets will be quite correct for kind of year 6 results, whereas for me, my students' GCSE target is based on how well they did at like English and maths in year 6. So it's just not transferable. So if you're in a department where those kind of things don't work, it's really important to be the voice and explain that to SLT and be like, no, I need to change these and I need to move them. And I think for me, it was a big turning point to understand the data, but also negotiated with SLT and be like, right, well, if I put X number like down by a grade, I will put more up by a grade, because that's where their abilities lie. But it's not going to end up being the pretty picture that they exactly think it is, but I will get them the same results. And I think for me, learning as a head of department to read data was so important. So I was so focused when I first became a head of department on making sure like all my 2s became 3s and my 3s became 4, and I came so focused on that bottom end, and those kids weren't ending and they weren't engaging and they had all this other stuff going on, and they were really, really hard work. And actually, if I sat and focused on my 5s and 6s and got them up to 6s and 7s, that was a way easier task to get them there, and involved far less effort and had much bigger impact. So I think it's being clever with your intervention and not always thinking it has to be the bottom ones, thinking about like your higher ones as well, and where your easy wins are, like who's like literally a couple of marks off, but actually if you embed something, they're going to nail that and be able to like succeed and go up a couple of grades. And I think that's quite a thing of head a department, that you do need to kind of be able to understand that and read it and see where your wins are, and see where they're doing that in terms of your department. And I guess perhaps with science, like for me, I've got textiles, I've got 3D, I've got photography, I've got art. So I've got different strands. So it's like, where are the same students that are doing the same ones not performing as well in each one, where it should be relatively consistent. So you can see errors kind of perhaps in the way things are being taught easier, and then you can kind of work out where your intervention is, rather than it necessarily being on that snapshot of that lesson observation on that one term, that you are using the data to kind of support it. If you see something that's not working, you've got that backup, or if it's vice versa, that lesson could look absolutely perfect because they're really good at performing, but actually something's not working. And perhaps also using that student voice and kind of speaking to the students and being like, have you learnt this? How have you learnt this? Like, and making sure that things are being taught properly within your department as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you should mention that, because I think when I started at the school I'm at now, with the 11 to 18, I really felt that change in the subject knowledge of the teachers. I really felt like I was going into a school where the subject knowledge was better, because it was an 11 to 18 school, and I felt like that standard was higher, just simply in terms of subject knowledge. Having taught at a school where I was head of department, there was only 5 of us in the department, and one of those people was me. So it was a very small department. We were only teaching one subject, triple science. So actually, I think the sort of subject knowledge is so important. And I really did feel that difference when I moved to a school that was much bigger, because then we've got heads of subject. So you've then got a head of physics that's got a brain like a blimp, and they know their subject inside out, and you really feel that difference, kind of thing. And I also agree with what you're saying on the intervention. And intervention's an interesting thing, because you have got to look at where the impact's going to be, haven't you? And generally, the list of students, once you look at your data and you look at the students who are furthest below where they should be, it tends to be the same sorts of students, and it's quite a few of those students, if we're honest, aren't really necessarily going to engage with the intervention, are they? So then you've got to be quite clever about, as you've said, where impact is the word, isn't it? Where are you going to have the most impact? Which group of students are more likely to engage with that intervention? Obviously, when are you going to do the intervention? Because if it is going to be students who aren't likely to turn up because they don't have that parental support, you might be needing to look at how you're going to use your curriculum time in a creative way, to try and build that intervention into your curriculum plan as well, if that's a possibility. So yeah, I mean, data isn't really my strong point, if I'm completely honest. But I do sometimes think people get a little bit sort of caught up on data a little bit too much. But obviously, identifying those students and having ways to support them, it is all important, isn't it? And it's just being creative enough to have that intervention and to make sure, again, it doesn't impinge too much on the work-life balance of the staff.
I think it's that, isn't it? You don't want it's especially with early careers teachers and stuff within your department, that they perhaps might not clock that Jimmy in their class who's not doing so well, and it's really, really, no matter what they're doing, is not working, and he's not attending an intervention. That's because Jimmy's being pulled to English, science, maths, geography intervention on all the other days, and Jimmy's exhausted and bored and clocked out and just wants it to be over. And I think it's kind of not getting disheartened when it doesn't work out, but really kind of what is the best use of your intervention time? It's probably not kind of hammering them for 2 hours every Monday all year. Like, work out what's going to work best and work as a team. Like, I think our science department kind of split it up, and they did each of them different revision sessions on their speciality, but any kid from any of their classes could come to it. That was when they were on study leave, so the kids could come in and do those sessions if they wanted to. But it wasn't like all those teachers are running those sessions just for those classes. Like, it is a group effort, and like you said, it's that work-life balance of what's going to kind of have the most impact with the least amount of effort, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And it's, the easy wins are all important, aren't they? But as you say, I think we did a similar thing within our faculty. When we had our Year 11 release time, we had a timetable. The students were aware, and we did have some arrive, but we did have a surprising number of students who regularly would turn up for after school revision. And sometimes you get certain students who you wouldn't expect. Sort of sometimes the more vulnerable students are coming along because they want to. Yeah. I think sometimes they just want somewhere to go, but they're also interested to try and to get involved as well. So yeah, it's a tricky one. Intervention is a tricky one, isn't it? To try and find something that works and that's effective. I mean, we've trialed recently using online quizzes and then trying to drill down into areas of our curriculum where students are struggling, and then look to build an intervention lesson into the curriculum plan. So there's lots of different ways that you can do that, obviously. So it's it's trying different things, isn't it, and finding something that works.
And that's the thing, isn't it? And I think that goes across kind of the way that we teach things. Like there's different things and giving things a go and not being afraid to try something with your department and try a different methodology. Like it might not work, but you give it a go and not being afraid to kind of take those risks as well as a head of department. Don't just sit in your comfortable little box being like, we're teaching the same lesson that we taught for the last 5 years, we're good. It's good to kind of mix it up and spice it up, shall we say, the teaching.
Well, absolutely. And we did something similar along those lines. I don't know when it was, a few months ago. We did some PD, and I remember doing that typical teacher thing where our head of faculty said, right, we're gonna, the heads of subjects, so we've got a head of physics, a head of biology, and head of chemistry, and on alternate weeks for 3 weeks they're going to do a little workshop with the whole faculty. And I remember thinking at the time, that typical teacher thing, there's other stuff we need to do, we got to finish marking these exams or whatever, we could be using the time for that. So even I had that negative thought, but I went in and I saw our subject leads deliver these little workshops, and my mind was blown. There was all little tricks and things that they'd come up with that I wouldn't even have thought of. So actually, I think you're right. Sometimes the how that is being delivered, so we get into that rut, don't we? That mindset, that day-to-day groove where we do our lessons in a similar way, and there is, that's not always a bad thing. We find something that's effective and we stick to it and we know it inside out. But sometimes we're missing a trick because we're surrounded by professionals who have probably got excellent ways of delivering a lesson that we don't know about. So it's trying to just get that information, that information across, isn't it? Those ideas, which is sometimes a time issue, but if you can do that, and if you can teach a lesson well, then that's going to then have implications for those students making progress, isn't it?
And I suppose that's the thing as well, as a head of department, it's important to kind of promote your teachers to go on CPD, to go elsewhere, to go visit other schools, and kind of bring back that. And it's not just our responsibility as head of departments to go on those courses and then try and feed it back. But it's important to kind of engage them in it. I'm very passionate. I think it's really important that teachers kind of look outside of their classroom and look elsewhere and see what other people are doing. So that kind of you're on the right track and also know what's going on, and you get to see those things that other people are trying that you can take back.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I do think that's a really powerful thing, and just something that we don't, I don't know, it just sort of gets forgotten about, doesn't it? It's almost like it's too obvious. What are we actually physically doing in those lessons when we're with those students? And we all assume that everyone's doing, well, I'm sure everyone is doing a really good job, but all of those ideas, when they come together, the best CPD I think I've had is when just other colleagues have come together to discuss ideas and thrash something out. And that's when I think teachers are the most effective, when they do come together and share those ideas.
And I think and it's the praising of good things as well that you see within your department. I think kind of it's really important to be organised and have like your agenda and go into your department meetings like ready and know what you're going to talk about, know what you're going to discuss, kind of know what dates people need to be aware of. Do remind your department when the report deadline is due, because we all ignore it and then it arrives really quickly, or remind them kind of when parents' evenings and things are, and have they, I don't know, we have online systems, and if you forget to block it out, you end up having, parents could have booked anything within 4 hours and you didn't put your 2 hour slot in. Kind of just little things like that. You're kind of, I always think of you like you're the nagging mum of the department. Like you need to kind of just remind them that things are coming.
It's being ahead. You just got to be ahead of the game all the time, haven't you? And the other little trick I always used to use was trying to make sure, I know this may sound a little bit like mother and father and children, but making sure they've got less excuse. So I used to actually timetable when I was going to do my book looks. I'm going to say, right, here's when I'm going to do my book looks. Here's when we're doing the assessments. So, right, here's where you've done the assessments. I'll expect you to be marking them. But then 2 weeks after that, I'd expect you to be maybe marking some, looking at your books again, or thinking about the feedback in your books. And obviously, I don't want to get into feedback because that's a whole other discussion, isn't it? But I think you're then showing them that's when you would expect them to be doing it. Someone might come to me and say, "Oh, you're looking at my books. I've got all these tests to mark," and I'd think, well, actually, if you'd have followed the schedule, you'd have found that you would have had an opportunity to do that. So that's another thing I used to do. And I always thought, I used to show the staff the calendar for the term or for the whole year and say, right, here's when we're doing our assessments. Here's when I need the data in by. And it's, if you can be ahead of the game, and you have to be, don't you, as a head of department, if there's a new assessment that needs to be printed and then quality assured and then sent to reprographics, you've got to constantly be several weeks ahead of everybody else, haven't you? And that's part of it, just sort of trying to stay ahead of everyone.
And I think it's that thing, you're not trying to catch anybody out. You don't want them to be like, well, you never told me that. Like, so
exactly,
they need to have accountability, and you can be like, well, I told you here, here, and here, and here, and because I've reminded you here, here, and here, these were your opportunities to come tell me if there was a problem, and we could have solved it together. And it's that you want to give them those opportunities to be like, oh, I'm going to struggle to meet that deadline because I'm moving house and
yes,
I'm not going to be able to mark at home, and by doing that, you're kind of creating this narrative that there isn't, of keeping them organised and making sure everyone hits the deadlines when they need to hit it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like you say, it is a balancing act, isn't it? You want to praise, and you touched on something that, again, that I fully agree with, and it doesn't take much, just a little bit of praise, and without being patronising, obviously, but you might just say, look, you did a really good job with that, with that little homework task on what do you do, or just anything like that. Or I noticed you're doing a really good job at your starter. I really like that starter you did. And little things like that, you don't forget it. I remember my head of department once telling me that he thought I was one of the most effective teachers in the faculty, and it was just one little comment, and I was riding high on this one little comment. So I don't think we should ever sort of underestimate the impact that a little bit of positive feedback has.
I think it's that, and you can kind of twist it as well. And if you don't have the energy to go around and do it, there's different ways of doing it, isn't there? I guess that you could get them all to bring in one bit of work that really surprised them from a student, and look at that. And then, like, we have a parent bulletin, so I always try and make sure that somebody from my department's work is in there, because I think it's really important that A, my department's seen, and B, that, like, we're promoting the good work that we're doing. And teaching is really, really tough. And I agree with what you said earlier. Like, specifically since COVID, it is very, very tough. So it's important to celebrate the wins, and even if it's being like, look at what so and so wrote compared to like what you did at the beginning of the year, and it's share the successes as a department, as well as like the venting of when it's difficult. You need to do play.
Yeah, that's it. And yeah, I mean, even the venting as well. Even the venting, that there's a place for that, but even that's a balance, isn't it? You want some venting, you want some opportunity for people to get things off their chest, but then you've got to make sure that doesn't become a toxic situation as well. So it just feels like a balancing act. Just everything about managing, it's very much a balancing act. But I have to say, I do really enjoy it. I do enjoy the challenge of managing people, and sort of feeling that you're making a difference to people, really.
And it's saying thank you to your team, isn't it? So they feel valued. And I think, like, people will work harder when they feel like it's appreciated. And same as, like, on my previous show, for anybody in the summer holidays that want to go listen to it, I actually had a life coach on, and we were talking about habits, and we were talking about actually that if you take a break and recharge, you're likely to come back and produce better work in a short amount of time than if you struggle through it. And I think sometimes it's us as head of departments that need to say to somebody, stop, have a break, and then come back to it, because there's definitely times in the year where you kind of plow on, and you as head of department should be able to see when kind of the well-being of your teachers are perhaps struggling, and you can be the key to that. But also that kind of picked me up. Like I remember, I'll give her a shout out, Laura. When we had Ofsted turn up, she had already planned these little baskets of goodies. So we literally came into school and we had these little, and it was like, don't what was those? Keep calm and carry on. It's only Ofsted kind of postcards, and we had chamomile tea to help us sleep the night before. We had a little miniature bottle of wine for when it was over. We had some chocolate to keep us going when we needed, and it was very like a pen that works just in case. And it's like it was so thoughtful, and she'd obviously clearly all planned it because it was there the day we had the call. We had it before they came in.
Oh wow! Imagine that level.
And she had it in her office, that prepared.
Yeah.
But I guess it's being seen as a teacher, and not like,
Yeah.
and it goes both ways as well in terms of and praising SLT. Like I always make sure that I kind of give a Christmas gift to SLT, because actually when you're at the top you generally just get moaned at, and I think that kind of goes down as well. So it's kind of make sure your team is kind of feeling appreciated. I can't speak now. And the good work is kind of praised, I guess.
Well, it goes a long way, doesn't it? I mean, like you say, even praising SLT, I'm sure it's not a job I've ever done, and I'm sure it, like you say, there's a lot of negativity comes your way. So a little bit of, and it doesn't take much, does it? One little comment. I always make a habit.
I really enjoyed that meeting. Yeah,
I really liked what you did, and I think it really is appreciated in it, and it's remembered, and that's the thing. It stays with you, doesn't it? Like I said, what my head of department said to me that was many years ago, 15 years ago. It's always stayed with me though. So it doesn't take much to sort of make a really big difference, does it? And that's something I always try to do. If someone's come to help me with a particularly challenging student, I'll always send an email, say, thank you for your support earlier today. Really much appreciated. So, yeah, I don't think I'm quite organised at the level of having a little basket of goodies, though. I'm starting to feel a little bit like I need to up my game a little bit.
We knew it was imminent, so yeah, I think we were a new school, so we knew they were coming, so we knew it would be that year at some point. But yeah, we've been chatting almost for an hour and a half. As I say, I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you. I feel like we have kind of found to discuss the kind of the old school negatives, but we've kind of also discussed the new positives about teaching, and hopefully we've given some people some really great tips on how to be a middle leader and the things
I really hope so.
About.
I'm not 100% sure, but I really hope there's something in all that rubbish that I was talking that somebody can pick something out that will help them. But yeah, no, I've really enjoyed it, Hannah, anyway, so thanks ever so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, thank you for joining me, and hopefully I'll have you on another show at some point.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, definitely. I'll definitely come back.
Starting at your new school in September goes well, and I'm sure they will have a great middle leader on their hands.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy the rest of the holidays.
Yes, you too. There's still a little bit to go, so we're not quite. Yeah, we've got a little bit of time to go still, haven't we?
There. It's actually quite like summer this week as well, which has been nice.
Yeah, thank you so much. Nice to speak to you.
Nice, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.